Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Dave Hayes, and today's short rant is about the Chinese land grab, question mark. Is there a Chinese land grab? Or, as I like to put it, the difference between wariness and paranoia. Okay, so where are we coming with this? I had a student who said, hey, I want to do some research on this topic. She's in North Dakota or somewhere out there and was saying that, there's a lot of discussion of China buying up farmland and concerns about threats to the U.S. food supply, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, that's interesting. I hadn't heard this, and I looked into it. And honestly, there's actually, when you look it up, you get a lot of reports about this one purchase, right? There's 300 acres of land in Grand Forks that a Chinese food company has purchased. They say they want to buy a mill. And so it's 300 acres, which in North Dakota is, this is like building a Walmart distribution center. Yeah. And in fact, it's not farmland. It's actually industrial land. But it's 300 acres. That's 12 miles from Grand Forks Air Force Base. And someone in the Air Force has started blogging or has been kind of banging the drum that, look, we do drone testing here, and that land is in a geographic footprint where it can get telemetry, and there's electronics espionage that could go on there. And so it's a security threat. And so there's that. And then we have seen, amongst other people, Congressman Dan Newhouse has introduced legislation seeking to prevent anyone associated with the Chinese government from buying land, farmland, agricultural land in the U.S. And he cited research. Part of the things he cited was research from 2018 that showed China's purchases of land grew tenfold in the previous years. And so a lot of concern, right? And well, what's going on here? And so, I'm going to come in and say, as the title should suggest, look, you're always wary, right? You should be wary about foreign nationals. And as we move into a Cold War with China, it's going to be different than the old Cold War, because the old Cold War was a clash between two separate economic systems. Well, guess what? China's not in a separate economic system. We're all in this very globalized world. And the reason that China is getting big is because it's participating very openly and actively in this world market. And so we're going to see activities that China's going to be involved in, a lot more economic activity with the U.S. just because China's the biggest, it's now rivaling us. It's the other big nation, big economy in the world. And so it's going to be more like the old things. And by the way, a lot of this stuff, I'm actually visiting my parents now in my old childhood home. And this is all flashing back to the 80s when the Japanese were the big threat. And oh my God, the Japanese bought Rockefeller Center. And we're American dream is being sold to Japan. And so there was all sorts of concern there. But at least Japan was a security ally, right? But nevertheless, there are echoes of this. So let's slow our roll here and look at some facts. First of all, CSI, Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, did an analysis of this situation a year ago, and they said, well, look, foreign nationals own 2.7% of U.S. agricultural land. So on the one hand, it's only 2.7%. On the other hand, but on the first hand, if you want to be alarmist about it, it's an area the size of like Iowa or some insane thing, right? That it actually is a lot of land, but it's still 2.7%. But more importantly, and this was very much what happened with the Japanese back in the 80s, when people started looking at, Japanese investment, they're taking over. They said, well, actually, there are a lot of other countries here. And in fact, this 2.7% is owned by a lot of different foreign nationals. China has less than 1% of that 2.7%. Canada is one of the biggest holders, and then a bunch of European countries have, because they're food companies that have own land, right? They're multinational companies. It shouldn't surprise us that these corporations are out there doing this. But China accounts for a fraction of this, right? It wasn't even 1 million acres. It was like 191,000 acres, right? So not a huge holding, right? And while they might have grown tenfold, that's where you kind of say, well, okay, they grew tenfold, but what was it before this, right? It grew a lot, but it was at a very low level. There are a lot of other countries, and of course, that Canada owns lots of farmland. Guess what? Where does it own it? In Maine, right? Where it's just like across the border. And the border up there is, it's sort of vague, notional. This was the thing we found in the 80s with the Japanese, right? That there was far more investment coming from Britain and the Netherlands, right? Everyone's like, the Netherlands was a huge investor. That's what's going on. So we want to be, let's not be so alarmist, right? Doesn't look to be in scale a very big deal. Then there's the question of espionage. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you should always be concerned about this. And, when it came to the 5G thing, like, oh, we don't want Chinese 5G equipment because there's too many opportunities to put backdoor access in that, right? And that could be a real problem. And I thought I don't think that was paranoia. That was wariness, but it was very, we hadn't shown there was anything, but I think there was this idea of like, well, you could hide it, right? And so you should be wary. You should be almost to the point of paranoia when it comes to electronic security because it's too easy to hide. Now, okay, in this plant, and when it comes to farmland, right, if you're trying to intercept the electronic communications between drones and bases, and you want to set up a receiver, it seems to me that buying 300 acres and building a mill is a very overt way of doing something that is probably better done covertly. And, why not? There's a patio world next door. Why not buy these people out or, co-opt them? And, it just seems to me that, and also my thing is, well, look, why are you worried about the Chinese getting this information? We've been sold out by, Americans sell out our secrets to foreign powers all the time, right? And so someone, it just seems to me that it doesn't really give them that big an advantage that, that they just haven't thought this through. And my other thing is like, hey, if you're putting out information you don't want people to get, maybe you need to move your transmitter or something. My point is the fact that the Chinese own that land, other people own land around it in that same footprint. Why do you think they aren't going to do something, clandestine? And by the way, opening a mill is not very clandestine. So I'm a little kind of like, be concerned, but, is this really what's going on? And so just, I say here, when we talk about this land grabbing and the Chinese having it, right? Actually, whenever you talk about a foreign nation owning things in your country, keep in mind that the market, there are market rules in this, right? And so when it comes to things like U.S. food security, there is a market for food. China is already buying food. Right, China took, they had a Chinese company that bought Smithfield Packing down in North Carolina, and they've been operating it. And the thing is that they were already importing food from they were a major importer of food, and they bought the Smithfield brand because they wanted the brand name, right? And they bought it through a Hong Kong company, and so it's this weird conglomerate, and it's a market, and we have market rules. We have market operations already. And first of all, you're going to see China is going to be playing in the world market. They got 1 billion people to feed, and and as they get wealthier, they will want more and more food and higher quality food, and so they may be interested in having a mill in the U.S., right? To supply, and so that they still have incentives to run that mill to make money. Right. This is the thing. There's a lot that goes on in the market. China is always going to be looking to buy food. And hey, don't we want to sell food to them? You were complaining that they're not buying our exports, that it's a one-way trade. Now, if they're buying food, fine. The fact that one of their companies wants to have a mill in the U.S., I mean, that makes sense to me, right? That's just part of their operation, that they're going to buy up this wheat and grind it and then sell it. And they're controlling their supply chain, which, hey, that makes a lot of sense if you ask me. And does having an extra mill in the U.S. that's devoted to exporting to China hurt U.S. I mean, we would do that, right? If an American did that, hey, I'm going to build this mill and I've got a contract to ship stuff to China, we think that was great, right? But a Chinese company comes in to do it. Oh, well, they're going to, they're going to move only ship stuff, and yeah, there might be a little less flexibility in there, but there were going to be demanders of food, right? So I'm like, look, we should expect this. China is a big country with a huge amount of money available for an investment. We're going to see this kind of stuff naturally as part of the market foundation. So let's not lose, it doesn't have to be nefarious. It probably isn't. And in general, it's probably a good thing. Finally, when it comes to foreign-owned assets, host nations tend to have the power. And I remember when the Japanese bought Rockefeller Center, and I'm here and I'm looking out this window, and I can't see New York through the trees, but New York's right there. And my father used to work. We walked through Rockefeller Center to get to work, and I remember his reaction though is he said, the Japanese bought Rockefeller Center. What are they going to do? Move it to Tokyo? No, they're going to run Rockefeller Center. Unless they want to lose their money, they're going to run Rockefeller Center in a valuable way, and they're going to invest it, and they're going to try to make money with it. And the way you make money with something is you appeal to customers, right? So Rockefeller Center got a facelift, right? And it didn't go anywhere. Same thing with agricultural land. If they build a mill in Grand Forks, there's a mill in Grand Forks. They're probably, I don't think they're going to import Chinese workers for it. They might try to get a Chinese construction company, but like they do with the Belt and Road Initiative, but it's a mill in Grand Forks. Isn't that a good thing? Right? And when it operates, it's going to make money and it's going to stimulate the local economy. And, the only difference about it being Chinese owned, because getting too confused, is that the profits would go to China, right? Well, and so the profits go to that Chinese multinational instead of a U.S. another multinational, right? Again, corporate ownership, right, of farms and agricultural land, that's actually probably a bigger question mark. Just that whole idea of, hey, increasingly, farms are corporate owned. What's that mean? And probably the Chinese thing is a drop in the bucket compared to that. But in the end of the day, host nations have huge power. So to own assets in the U.S., immovable assets in the U.S., is a huge liability for these companies. And so China is kind of fostering interdependence with the U.S. as a result of this. And so, as we see, they're already, Congress is passing laws that, you can't be involved. And, the power the U.S. has is good. But at the same time, we do have limited powers, right? We do have protections for property rights that don't exist, ironically, in countries like China. They're finding that they're trying to protect them, but and so there's we should not be surprised that a lot of investment finds its way to the U.S. from China, much the way a lot of that Russian oligarch money was finding its way into real estate in the U.S. And they think that in U.S. and Great Britain, they think that's where the oligarchs in Russia and Putin himself has hidden a lot of their wealth that they've stolen basically from the country. And the point is that the protections for property rights are strong by and large in the U.S. And that's we're going to attract investment because of that. That's a good thing. However, when it comes to security concerns, we still have power, right? We can confiscate things. And by the way, if they had a mill that, first of all, think of all this stuff we confiscate in the war on drugs, right? You pass a law and say, okay, if you do something, well, you can do that with the Chinese, right? You say, if you're convicted of espionage, that mill now belongs to us. Huge liability for the Chinese. So they're really running more risks in doing this kind of investment than we are. And so this is just all, yes, be wary. I don't want to be Pollyanna about it. I don't want to be naive, but we don't necessarily want to be paranoid. There's a lot going on here. We are going to see a lot more Chinese activity for the reason I just said, and that's going to be natural. And I think it's going to be important to kind of, keep things in check, keep things in perspective. That's basically what I'm saying here. So be wary, but not paranoid.
Thank you for watching my short rant. I hope it was short and not too much of a rant. I'm Dr. Dave Hayes, and though I teach at Troy University, this video is my own work. Troy University has neither approved nor reviewed the content. So there. And if you want to learn more about Troy anyway, figure out who would hire a guy like this, you can always go to www.troy.edu. I also am going to have a little card popping up here that you can go see my bio and some information about where I teach, which will descend to shameless self-promotion, but I want more students, what can I say? And finally, the music you've been listening to is Tonight at 8 by Shane Ivers. So thank you for listening, and I hope you'll come back and enjoy another short rant.